So welcome to coming to this conference. I think you will find that this conference is particularly important. If you were along the juniors in early January, you were probably insane and got lucky by what you experienced until mid-August. Now we've given up a lot of those gains, but the circumstances have changed in a dramatic way, and now is the time to come and really kick the tires, look at what's going on. There still are only about 500-600 companies out of 1,500 that are viable as juniors. The rest are still severely damaged underwater, less than 200,000 working capital. The problems afflicting the industry have not changed. Now, you may wonder about the title of my talk, The New Age of Surrealism. I was here in June when Zimtu put on a conference, something similar to this, and I asked the question, imagine Wrecking Ball Trump as president. And now we are dealing with the reality. When I went to bed on Tuesday night, I was severely depressed. And in the morning, when I woke up, I was still depressed. But then as I started to think about it, I realized there's something else going on here. My initial intuition that Donald Trump is a performance artist with a mission that isn't just a narcissistic self-aggrandizement mission, but it's something to change. I said, you know what? He's actually created the conditions that allows him to make a difference. He single-handedly destroyed the two parties in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats. And he now has a blank slate to start something new. Now, that's possibly a reason why gold tanked, as people realize that maybe he's not going to do all the bad and stupid things that he promised to do while he was campaigning for the position. But one of his big questions was, or things was, he's going to make America great again. And I always thought this was a bit of a slander, because when you look at the global GDP, well, America is still by far the greatest economy. You look in terms of military spending, America is still by far the greatest military superpower. So what is he talking about? When did America stop being great? Now, the real theme is that America's status as the greatest nation, the superpower, in the long run will not be that. We are in an unavoidable transition where China is emerging as a superpower, Russia is trying to claw back its old role, and the United States, by virtue of its relatively smaller population of only 350 million people, cannot maintain that advantage in the long run. And so you see that the two trends here. You see the US share of GDP slowly declining. You see the Chinese share continuing to go up. And then you see the military spending sort of wobbling, and you see the Chinese military spending going up. These trends are going to be with us for a while. So it's really a question of more of the United States becoming not as great, but still a great nation. Now, one reason to be very optimistic about gold is there are all these flashpoints in the world. There's the South China Sea problem, where China is trying to expand its own footprint to push the pivot of America away, to shut down America's containment strategy. You've got Rodi Duterte behaving like he's a little Hitler, going out and just killing people because they're addicted to drugs and threatening to do it to 3 million of them. You've got crazy man Kim Jong-un out there testing all kinds of nuclear weapons, like what is he going to do, like drop one on Seoul and think that nothing's going to happen. You have all kinds of these flashpoints out there, and people are frightened because Trump is the one who can actually launch a nuclear attack on some part of the rest of the world. Now, everybody in the United States is very concerned about this, and I think that concern is a bit misplaced. But what we are going to see in the next few months, and even right away after, is these other countries push the envelope to see what does America do when they have, now that Trump was going to be the next president, after he has said all the crazy things that he does. Now, we've heard all this talk about the end of globalization, how he's going to introduce protectionism and all that kind of stuff. That's a red herring. When you look at the last 30 years, that was a problem. Yes, manufacturing jobs offshoring, going to China, to a lower cost jurisdiction where labor is cheap, where there are no environmental controls or anything like that. But that's not the problem. Manufacturing is coming back to the United States, but it's coming back as part of the rise of the machine age. And the number of people being employed by US manufacturing are a fraction of what they used to be. But an even bigger problem is that the middle class, which is more in the knowledge workers, in financial services, in business and professional jobs, which has been almost on a relentless uptrend, it is now coming under siege because their functions are slowly being replaced through artificial intelligence, through automation, and so on. So the really big question for the future is, okay, what are people going to do? And this is what is at the back of the mind of all these people who voted for Trump. The first question, the most important question is, what is the worker of the future supposed to do to enable him to consume all these goods and services produced by an increasingly machine-based production system that's owned by less than 0.1% of the population? Now that's the question for the young people. The other question is the one for the biggest retirement generation ever with the greatest longevity expectations is, how are the benefits from those goods and services produced by this highly automated machine age going to be transferred to us in our retirement, where we are no longer supposed to be engaged in productive activity that enables us to continue to exist as human beings? These are the most challenging questions facing the world. And the old system, the system represented by Hillary Clinton, by the Paul Ryans and all the old guard Republican, they had a status quo thing, and it was just lurching towards us kind of a going nowhere. These questions were not being addressed, which is why we have an end times mentality out there in the older crowd, which enables them to vote for a Trump. Yeah, who cares if he blows up the world? We're not long for this world anymore. And why you have in the younger generation an attitude of forget saving. There's no infrastructure being rebuilt or anything for us. There's this big attitude, no, keep the deficit low, don't do fiscal stimulus of any sort. So they now just live for the moment. They live for experience. They enjoy. They put off having children. They don't bother going for the old thing that we're all supposed to be doing, get a house, get married, accumulate wealth, and then retire. So the young people have been infected by an end times mentality also. And that is why on Tuesday night, when I watched Donald Trump and listened to him, he all of a sudden, he was not offensive. He was talking about infrastructure spending, something that the Democrats have wanted to do for the last 8 years and has been strongly resisted by the Republicans. And I switched the channel to Fox News, and they had the House, they had the Senate, they have the presidency. You should have expected them to be high-fiving and cartwheeling. No, they were actually quite subdued, because they know that Trump is completely now on his own, has almost absolute power to either make a complete fool of himself or become a very sane individual who listens to everybody and allows the two-party system to split into a right wing, a left wing, and a centrist party that is the moderate Republicans and the moderate Democrats, and together they can push through infrastructure spending bill and restore hope to a nation that has started to see just a shrinking light at the end of the tunnel. And all of this is good for the resource sector. And if he doesn't want to do this, if he does want to be a fool and continue to do all this nasty stuff that he said that was basically pandering to the fringe of the Republican Party, you take a look at this map. The popular vote actually went to the Democrats, but it's physically, spatially very distinct. This is not like Nazi Germany, where you had the Nazis taking on the communists who were within their midst, and they were able to rally the people against it. If Trump goes with the right wing and starts to try to shove a fundamentalist Christianity or something down the throats of America, you will end up seeing a separation, a physical separation of the United States into separate parts. And in fact, one of the jokes making the rounds is that of Jesus land, whereas the northeast coast and the west coast actually merges with Canada, and that red part in the middle becomes sort of like a primitive religious type of totalitarian system. Now, the other thing is with this detonating of both parties, you all probably remember Occupy Wall Street, which popped up in 2011 and got everybody worked up, spontaneous protests, and then it vanished. The conditions weren't right. They were just protesting against Wall Street and all that. Now the conditions are right to protest against a giant sort of stuff of bad things that Trump promised to do, which is supported by certain parts of the population. Now the conditions are right for spontaneous protests to break out anywhere. And Trump is no dummy. He understands this. This is why all these bozos that he has had as consultants, he's already ditched them and is sitting down talking to everybody that he trashed in the last 2 months. So there is a condition in place to prevent a Nazi Germany type totalitarian system from erupting in the United States. So he has a choice. He is the ultimate narcissist. He can either go down as a buffoon who ends up being shot or impeached or something like that, or he can actually recognize that he is in this pivotal spot where he has offended absolutely everybody, and therefore if he says, well, I didn't mean it, it doesn't matter. It's not like he only offended these people and those ones. No, he pissed everybody off. So he's actually in a position to do something constructive. I don't know that he will, but this is what, by the end of that day, had me suddenly feeling good about the future again, despite all the bad stuff that he had said. So the 4 core narratives, commodity cycle, gold bug, security of supply, and discovery exploration. These are the 4 ways I look at the juniors. We went through a super cycle, and you can see this tremendous move we went up here in the value of the resource sector, the global resource sector. This is now history. It is not going to happen again. This was caused when China hit a tipping point here, and they're now here. And the supply infrastructure has accommodated the kind of growth potential, explosive growth potential, is not really possible for China. It's transitioning away from a productive capacity build-out economy to more of a goods and services economy. The great hope, India is here. It's at least 5 years before they are possibly in a position to trigger a breakout. So in terms of super cycle, forget it. It's not happening. The way to start thinking about things is disruption of supply or demand materializing as a result of innovation. And I think if some of this protectionist stuff does go through, and if China, Russia push the envelope and all that, you're probably not going to see wars happen, but you're going to see a retreat into smaller economic zones. For example, North and South America could form a zone. They have all the raw materials that they need to sustain themselves. They could just let these other parts of the world destroy themselves. So that has implications for the question, where does your metal come from? And as you can see from this chart, a lot of it comes from China and Russia. So this is a big problem. And the question now is, what jurisdiction is your metal coming from? And the Canadian juniors, they prefer to operate in somewhat secure jurisdictions. So even though places like Canada, the United States may have lower grade deposits than elsewhere in the world, there's going to be a premium attached to the long-term security of supply from deposits in these parts of the world. So it's again time to look at the ones that aren't so great, the optionality plays, as well as start exploring again in these regions that are sort of discarded, well, not exciting as the Congo. Now, another big thing people don't quite understand is the environmental awakening that's going on in China. Robert Friedland has a priceless line. He says the combination of pollution and corruption is toxic to the future of the Communist Party. And this is why you see this anti-corruption drive, Xi Jinping trying to regain control right down to the local level so that environmental rules can be enforced and made to happen. Because pollution is democratic. It does not avoid the elites and just pollute the 99 percenters. Everybody is affected. This is China, the Chinese Communist Party's biggest threat to its own continued dominance in China. So even this latest thing that's happening, setting up monitoring stations downstream from all these cities and places to see what the pollution levels is, making it part of the public domain and trying to figure out where it is. This is a forcing of this issue. And for a lot of metals, this is a big deal. And of course for manufacturing, everybody who moved their factories to China because China volunteered itself as a toilet for all the emissions, they know the game is over. That's why they're repatriating their production capacity to places like the United States, and the Chinese themselves are also starting to clean up. But for many of these mines, especially zinc, you ask yourself, where is the Chinese Red Dog mine? Where does all this Chinese zinc come from? They went from 1980 almost nothing to 40% of the world's supply right now. It comes from many small mines, very polluting, very inefficient. A lot of them probably depleting by now, getting too deep to mine. When they have to comply with environmental standards, forget it. They'll be shut down. So everybody talks about the depletion of Western mines like Century and Lachine and the one in New Brunswick and all this Western supply coming off. And they all assume, yeah, the Chinese will rise up and meet any new price gain. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think zinc, unlike what Michael was sort of fretting about this morning, that the zinc has these short and beautiful little spikes and then dies, I think we're heading into a longer term zinc bull market. Now, other metals, you assume the longevity. Robert Friedland has other interesting comments to make. And in Mines and Money in Toronto, he, taking his cue from Trump and Duterte and other people who feel that you don't need to be polite anymore, declared the Chilean copper mines as like old ladies lying in bed waiting to die. Now, you actually felt a palpable gasp in the audience that he expressed it that way. And I don't know whether he was just being cruel or whether he was just using a metaphor for this idea that these Chilean copper mines have not had reinvestment done into them. If they want to keep going, they need $40–50 billion worth of further investment. So Chile, as that great pump of copper into the world, is probably also stalled. What else have I got up there? Nickel. It all comes from Philippines. A big chunk of it comes from the Philippines and Indonesia. And Indonesia sort of shut it down. And they're building beneficiation on their own soil so that the raw ore is no longer shipped to China. But the Philippines have picked up the slack. But Duterte has a mines or environmental minister who's actually shutting down these dirty, raping operations that destroy the land. So that big nickel bulge is also coming to an end. And if the Philippines ends up going berserk because this guy really does carry out with his, kill 3 million drug addicts and that to clean up the country and the place erupts into civil war, well then kiss some of that, more of that nickel supply goodbye. Cobalt, 50% comes from the Congo. The Congo's president has decided he's going to be president for life. The Congo is about to fall apart into a civil war just like in 1990. Cobalt's part of the electric car industry, part of the battery system. So cobalt stories are potentially very interesting, even though they don't compare to the Congo in terms of grade. Uranium, probably the worst pick by some of the big cartel groups in this sector for the last 5 years, so terribly wrong. 40% comes from Kazakhstan, who has come out of nowhere with a little bit of help from the Clinton Foundation and all that along the way. And Kazakhstan, if Putin really starts to push the envelope and wants to annex Latvia and so on, all this part of the world is not going to be supplying stuff so easily. So uranium has potential for substantial turnaround because all those plans to build those Chinese reactors and all that, they're still intact. And even rare earths. Rare earth prices are back where they started in 2009, and it still all mainly comes from China. Tungsten still mainly comes from China. If China pushes the envelope in the South China Sea, or even decides to get it over with and annex Taiwan, and America says, well, okay, we're not going to deal with you anymore, Where's your tungsten going to come from? Where are your rare earths going to come from? So think in terms of disruption of security of supply as a driver of price in the near to medium term future, and wait for like 2025 and beyond for an India-driven supercycle to kick in. In the case of gold, forget about fiat currency debasement and hyperinflation, all that. That's not really going to happen. Maybe if Trump gets infrastructure spending done and gets America rolling again, we will see inflation materialize. The traditional gold bug narrative will be active again. But in the meantime, it is uncertainty about this long-term trend of America ceasing to be as great as it was, not inferior to anybody for some time, but becoming less great is a reason to own physical gold. And as the world prospers and grows and becomes a more balanced set of superpowers, gold ownership is just a natural. And for those who already own the 160,000 tons that exist, their willingness to part with it is going to diminish. So we could see, just if gold stays 10% of GDP, we could see $1,500 in the next 3-4 years as a real price. But if stresses happen, like Kim Jong-un does something stupid or whatever, you could see a run to $2,000, $3,000 in real price terms. It won't stay there in the longer term. It'll come back. But we are now in conditions where this could happen. And then the resource sector goes absolutely ballistic. And so there's all your optionality plays, like my favorite spec value hunter pick, Midas, which is not really in the money at the current gold price, but you take it to $1,500, $1,600, it's well in the money, you get $2,000 gold, and all of a sudden you can see we're talking about $4 to $7 stock for a 91-cent stock. So these deals are out there as optionality plays. So that's one area that you can look at. Now, I'm actually a discovery guy. When I started in 1983, it was with the Hemlo discovery. So I've watched stocks go from nothing to 10, 20, 50, 100-fold. This is what turns my crank in this sector. Waiting for the price of a metal to go up doesn't really appeal to me. I like discovery exploration plays. And there's quite a few of them here. I break them down into 3 groups. There's the traditional grassroots exploration, where you're like using traditional methods to prospect and find targets and drill them. Two of the ones that I like here are Atamera, which is doing this in northeastern Washington. And another is Playfair, which has gone into Northern Ireland and is testing targets that nobody has ever really looked at that actually outcrop and are just waiting for somebody to demonstrate that there's vertical extent to the little bit of gold that you have at surface. The second type is the one that totally cranks me, because I am not a climate change skeptic and anti-science type person. I love science. And that is coming up with new methods to see deposits that were not visible with the old methods practiced in the last 100 years. And two of them are San Marco, who presented this morning. Their Globetrotter group collects publicly available Aster data, and then they've developed algorithms to clear out the noise and spot alteration systems in Sonora State. And then they handed it off to Bob Willis's group, and they used all their knowledge about the history and all that to check out which ones are actually undiscovered alteration systems. That's what they're out there doing now, is stealth staking or negotiating these things where the owners don't even know that they may be on top of a major system that could yield a multi-million ounce gold system or a copper discovery. And then there's Nevada Exploration Inc., who's going to present later this afternoon, which uses groundwater sampling in Nevada, where half of the bedrock that hosts all these fabulous Carlin Trend deposits were artificially dropped down well after these deposits formed and then buried by gravel, which is really difficult to see through. And then the one that's really getting the market excited these days is rethinking existing systems that for whatever reason proved not worth developing. The grade wasn't right or something was wrong with it, but putting geological brains to work and saying, is there something else going on here? And of course, the big example was Arizona Mining with their Hermosa Taylor system, the world-class discovery, the best performer in the market this year, something I recommended in January and again in March. It's gone from 35, 40 cents to over $3. And they had wasted $40 million on a near surface thing that was no good. And then Don Taylor goes in there and says, what's the stuff at the bottom? Where does it go? And what is all this historical stuff? Why did the Sarco drill these holes here and this and never follow up? And it was like just sitting there for one geologist to connect all the dots and say, there's something huge going on here. And now they've been drilling this up. They're over 100 million tons. And of course, the two here are Kalanick's mines, which is in east of the Flin Flon camp, revisiting the Pine Bay, trying to reinterpret the way the horizons fold and all that, got into a hole which Placer wished it would have hit 10, 20 years ago, and now they may have a massive VMS discovery on their hand. The other one who will be presenting later today is Serengeti, which found the Kwanika deposit from scratch. It wasn't good enough, but now has Daewoo, a Korean company, looking at it again. It's going to farm in for 35%. They're rethinking their understanding of the fabric of the domains for the resource, but they're also doing additional work and realizing there's these IP targets, other sulfide systems deeper and nearby that could be even bigger and better, sort of like Robert Friedland's Oyu Tolgoi system, where he bought this worthless copper deposit from BHP and then put his geophysicists to work and found the down structure Hugo Dummett zone, which was a massively bigger and richer than the original zone that he bought for a pittance from BHP. So there's your sort of an example of that is what I look for in discovery exploration juniors. And we're heading into a market where we're going to see stronger metal prices helping out, but there's also going to be an appetite for the exploration juniors, for companies like Balmoral, which practices traditional exploration, going into these areas. And we're not quite there yet in having a superabundance of money coming in, but now's the time to start looking for the teams and companies that are putting it together, that are going to be the first to catch the wave of capital as it comes back into the resource sector. And of course, I have to talk about my worst pick of the year, Scandium International, absolutely flat, has not gone anywhere yet. This is ready to take off. They just received their development consent on Thursday. They're now in the sprint for the mining lease. We're waiting for offtake agreements. And I'll be publishing something for Sunday night for Monday, which explains why even if they finance at 10 cents and issue 1 billion shares for the CapEx, there's still 40 to 80 cents as a price target for 3 years from now. But if it goes into the 40, 60 cent range, you can see the type of targets that's there. And that's just with their feasibility study. If you actually use the cash flow to expand production as offtake comes in, as the world starts to realize scandium is the new reality, we can use aluminum scandium alloy, you'll end up seeing a $3 to $6, $4 to $8, and that's just with their one project. So this one now is repeated as my favorite pick going forward, and it's independent of what Trump and that does, because the world is still going to exist no matter how badly he may succeed in messing it up if he doesn't behave sensibly. And there's a special, for those of you who have a lapsed subscription or have never registered, go register or re-register and get 30 free days by putting in that little MIF 2016, and that's good till the end of this year. Thank you.